Hey guys! Are you ready to start creating our first field within the WordPress theme customizer? Great! In this class, you start to see that this tool is very powerful and versatile. After you understand how it works, you see that the limit will almost always be your imagination, because you can implement many things with it. What you see today is just an introduction on how to use the tool. But we use it again and talk about it in the next lessons. For now, you just learn the basics about it in order to create a single field, which is the theme's copyright. So without too much delay, let's get started because this lecture will be a bit lengthy. Well, a copyright info is just a simple text field. To tell you the truth, there's not much of a need to make it a customizable field. We could just create it directly into the code. However, I will teach you guys how to include it in the theme customizer for learning purposes. And as it's just a text field, it's perfect for you to see how customizer works and in the least traumatic way possible, say. For starters, let's open up our Sublime Text or the editor you're using, okay? Here inside the directory called inc, we're going to create a new file called customizer.php. This is where you'll be creating all the necessary fields. However, since this file is not automatically included in the initial WordPress loading process, we need to require this file inside the functions.php file. This one, functions.php, in turn, does load automatically. It's the same thing we did up here to call the responsive menu file. So we can copy this here to speed up the work. And let's just change the file name. Okay, let's save. Now in customizer.php, let's start creating something. First, let's open the PHP tag. But since we're going to write pure PHP code in here, we don't need the closing tag, okay? And previously in the course, I've already explained why. Let's start with the documentation. Let's create a function. The name of this function can be any name you want. In my case, I will call this function fancy _ lab _ customizer. The name isn't that important, but it's very important that it passes a parameter in here. And this parameter is a variable called wp _ customize. Simple as that. Well, let's recall some basic details I mentioned in the last lesson. Let's forget for now that there are those elements called panels, right? So the theme customizer then is made up of sections. And within each section, we got one more controls, right? So let's create the first section. Let's write a comment here indicating that this section will be for copyright information. Let's type in copyright section. Pay close attention to the structure that I'm going to explain to you now. At first glance, it looks very complicated and it can really confuse a lot. But after being created once, it can be copied and pasted so you can create the other sections. And then the other controls. The first thing we're going to do is call a variable named wp _ customize. Actually, technically speaking, this variable is an object of the WP Customize Manager class. And this class is responsible for handling the execution and control of the customizer. So let's type in a small arrow with a minus or hyphen and greater than keys. And let's pass in a function called add _ section. Again, technically speaking, to be more accurate, this class object here is calling a class method named add section. You see still in this lesson that each time you'll be calling a different method. When you're building sections, we use add section. For controls, we use add control, and so on. Okay, now inside this add section, we want to inform two things. First, a name or an ID for the section, and then an array of arguments. First, the section ID. I always use a name that starts with sec_something. You see in this class that it will help a lot not to get confused or not to get lost in the code. So I recommend you to do the same. It's my way of doing things, but I think it helps a lot. Now to finish off, recreate an array with some arguments. Let's pass 2 arguments. The first one will be title. Let's type here copyright settings. And the second argument will be description. The value of the title argument will be inside the clickable object of the section. So when we click on this object, we'll visualize the controls it has inside it. The section will only appear after we have some control inside it. So it's no use saving and trying to see the section in Customizer right now because it's not going to display yet, okay? Now a detail that I didn't explain in the last lecture because it wouldn't make much sense then, but now it makes more sense. Between the section and the controls, we have the so-called settings. They are responsible for saving the data entered in each control, passing this data directly onto the database. Without these settings, it's not possible to persist the data coming from the controls in the database. A curiosity, WordPress saves all this data inside the WP options table in a field that starts with the name theme_mods. So if you need to check how this customizer data is being stored in the database, just have a look at this table and search the fields that begin with theme_mods. Let's write a command here. Basically, the structure of the setting is very similar to one of a section. Let's start with the object. Now, instead of calling add section, we call another method named add_setting. Here we also pass 2 parameters. The first one is the name of the setting, and the second one is an array of arguments. For the name of the setting, I also use something like set_something. Now inside the array, we pass the following arguments. The first is type. This argument refers to the type of field that will be stored into the database. We can have 2 types of fields, option and theme modifications or simply theme mod. To better understand the difference between them, let's see what the WordPress documentation tells us. So the documentation here says that there are 2 primary types of settings, options and theme modifications. Options are stored directly in the WP options table of the WordPress database and apply to the site regardless of the active theme. Here's an important thing. Themes should rarely, if ever, add settings of the option type. Theme mods, on the other hand, are specific to a particular theme. So for the first argument, let's pass the theme_mod value, alright? The second argument is called default, and it's the default value that appears inside the customizer form. In most cases, I always pass an empty string. And there's also a very interesting way to pass the default value straight to the front end, as you see. And the last one is sanitize_callback. Well, this one is going to take a little while to explain because it's more complex. Here's the thing. Since we're creating an interface between the theme user and the database, we should never trust the type of data that the user will provide. By mistake, they can end up inputting things they shouldn't. So as good developers we are, we have to always anticipate things, validating as much possible the data provided by the site owner. That's what this last field is for, sanitize callback. It's nothing more than the name of a function used to clean sanitize the data entered by the user. For example, let's suppose you create a field for the user to input the valid ID of a category. You know that usually the ID has to be a numeric value, right? But the user may not know, and then try to input letters instead, strings. And then, buddy, if your form allows users to input strings instead of a number, depending on where this information is used, it can break the page. For this, you have to sanitize this information. WordPress itself already has a series of filters that can be used for this. Filters that are defined globally and work anywhere in the code. I'll make available to you a very interesting tutorial that shows most of these filters. This one here. The WordPress theme review team also has some pretty cool reference material on GitHub, which is on this page here. I'll also leave the link for you to check when you need it, okay? But let's focus on this first page. Here we got examples of the filters used for most WordPress customizer fields. For example, which filter should I use to sanitize a field that will accept a URL? Then it shows here this filter called Ask URL Raw. And further down here, you have a list of other filters that can help you too, depending on your project. Most of them, or maybe all of them, are functions belonging to the WordPress's own source code from its library. You have to create your own function to sanitize the data only in a few cases. For example, this first case that the author shows here, RadioBox. Probably WordPress doesn't have a filter capable of cleaning data from a RadioBox. So he created his own function up here and then call it back here inside the sanitize callback. We're gonna use this material as a starting point, okay? In some cases, you can find other filters that are better or more suitable than those shown here. So in our case, we have a simple text field. Let's see what is being suggested here. Look, the idea is that we use this filter called WP filter no HTML access. Complex name, right? But what it does is remove all the HTML from the text that the user will enter. However, there is another filter called sanitize text field, which I think it's more appropriate in this case. So let's pass it in here. The important thing is that you don't leave this field blank, okay? Alright, we already have our section created and also our setting. All that is missing is the control itself. To speed things up, let's copy this structure here. I'll change the method name to add control. And I will remove these arguments. The first field that deserves attention is this first one here. Here we will pass the name of the setting to which this control is linked to. So since this control, which is going to be a text field, belongs to this setting up here, we pass its name as a string. Set _ copyright. This field is a link between the control and the setting. A lot of attention here, okay? And now let's go straight to the arguments then. The first one is a label, and it corresponds to the text that is displayed before the field. Then description. Now the last two deserve a little more attention. Section. Here we have to enter the name of the section to which this control is linked to. And the name is sec _ copyright. This is the, connection between the control and the section. It also deserves a lot of attention. Have you noticed why I have labeled the name of the sections and settings with these prefixes? It's easier for me not to be lost in the code, alright? And now the last argument, type. This one here is for the kind of control or field we're building. In our case, it will be a text field, but it could also be a text area, checkbox, select, radio, etc. You can refer to the same site that I opened earlier in this lesson and see what are the types of fields allowed. Or you can visit the Themes Developers Manual, another link that I will also make available. I'm going to add some tabs to my code like this, so I can visually identify that these are fields of this section. But you don't have to do that, it's not mandatory. And now, to finish this file for today, let's add an action to load this function we just created. Add action. And this function needs to be fired on an action hook called customize_register. And here in the second parameter, we pass the name of our function, Fancy Lab Customizer. Okay, let's save. And we can already check if everything's working. Let's go to the customizer. Here's the section we just created. And inside it, the field we created. Let's change its value. And save. At this moment, the field value was saved into the WP options table. Then every time I change the field value, the data will be updated into the database. If you take a look at the WP options table now, you see the value stored over there. Here, look. Great. There is only one way to get this value from the database and display it on the screen. Let's open our footer.php file then. Let's delete this text here. Create a paragraph. And to call the field is very easy. Let's use the getThemeMod function. This function is used to get values from theme mods, of course. GetThemeMod. And inside it, we're gonna pass the name of the setting that stores the value of this field. In our case, the setting is called set_copyright. In order for the saved value to appear on the screen, we just need to echo it out here. I can pass a second parameter to this function, specifying a default value that should appear on the front end when the field is not defined. This usually occurs when the user installs and activates the theme for the first time. Since there's nothing stored in the database until the moment he or she clicks on the Publish button, the field will be empty on the screen. So passing a second parameter here, I guarantee that something will appear on the screen even if there's nothing yet into the database. Let's pass this text. Copyright X. All rights reserved. Let's save it. And let's see if it's working. First, let's check the theme. Perfect. Now let's reopen the theme customizer. And let's type some text. Look how cool it is. The preview area is refreshing. And the value of the field changes accordingly. Very nice. So we have our first field working in Customizer. What a breakthrough! But we still have a long way to go. In the next lesson, we will again use the tool to give the user more control over certain points of the layout. WordPress is a real toolbox, my friends. So see you then in the next lessons.